So this week I worked mostly on Chapter 7, Section 7.4 problems. They took a while. I only did the first three. They have multiples. And it's all about Maclaurin series and proving that the function is analytic, which basically says when you take the limit of the Maclaurin series, you should get your function. There are other theorems. I actually took my time, went through all the theorems in Section 7.4 for Taylor series, Maclaurin series, basically all about is the function analytic on the reals or a specific range. It was, when I read this originally, it was a long section to read. When I worked on the problems, it was also a long section to work on. And then I just did one simple Newton's method problem in Section 7.5. I could have done more, but I'm moving on. It's my reading cycle anyways, and so I'm planning to come back for a second cycle. Started on Chapter 8 problems for Euclidean spaces, but I'll have to do a thorough review of my simple vector calculus. I haven't forgotten it, but I just need to go back. So I'm going to do some Thomas and Finney in the background as well. I've already started, and I worked on problem 1 here, section 8.1. Then for reading, I finished all of chapter 9, and I started on metric spaces in chapter 10. Now in the book, it's very interesting. When you work on chapter 9, the author, Wade, says, is it in chapter 9? He doesn't say it in chapter 9, but he says it in chapter 10. So this chapter is an alternative to chapter 9. Covers topological ideas in a metric space setting. So if you already covered chapter 9, skip this chapter and go to chapter 11. I'm not going to do that. I want to read the whole book. And so I'm actually going to work on 9 and 10 at the same time. Chapter 10 should be a fairly quick read. It's a shorter chapter, so I'm already in section 10.1. I started this morning. So yeah, I plan to keep reading. Then when it comes to what I've read, of course, I finished chapter 5, and I'm reading in chapter 10. For problems, I barely moved an inch, and only because those first 3 problems in section 7.4 required a lot of calculations. I think they did, and the proofs are really tricky in the sense that you have to lay out, there's multiple theorems, you have to pick which ones you want to use, and I seem to go for one of them most of the time, but I didn't write the proofs clean, and I plan to do it at some point later on, and I just did that in Newton's method problem, and of course I started problems in section 8.1. So this means that I have finished my second notebook. In my second notebook, I worked, of course, those 3 problems with sections, 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and so on. And there's a lot of differentiation to get to the Maclaurin series. It's good practice to just do all the derivatives just to get a feel for it. But I have to come back to these problems. Some of them were easy, but there were a couple where I could see that the pattern was just, I just couldn't get it together. I couldn't get it together. So if I did the derivative and I took the value at 0 and I wrote it down, it was the function itself, the 0th derivative, which is the function itself, was 1. Then the first derivative was 1. Then the second derivative was 0. The 6 was 0. The 10 was 0. The 14 was 0. So every 4, the function, the derivative is 0, but then the pattern was interesting. It was -2, -4, -4, then 8, 16, 16, then -32, -64, -64. So I see a pattern, and I think this comes from a binomial, and so I have to come back and actually figure it out. The same happened for another one of the problems, 3C. So yeah, this is a very strong revisit. I wrote down the theorems just to get a feel for them, but it's a strong revisit. Come back, write them out clean, but this is not the time. I know what I have to do, and almost at this stage of the game is actually good enough for now. Got a really great handout. I debated whether to add it or not, but it's got a lot of examples of Maclaurin series fully worked out, but in a way that you do it in a calculus book. This could not be from an analysis course because there's no closed forms. It's all about doing the first few terms. And that's fine, but it's pretty thorough. So I learned from working through these examples, and yeah, a very strong comeback, section 7.4. I'm gonna say so far it's been the section that has given me the most trouble, that's been the most challenging. And enjoyable too, because I love calculations, but I don't want to get mired in calculations in my first pass. I already showed chapter 8 last time, and so all I really need to show here is that I've started working on these problems. And again, I figured these out. I think this is wrong, but I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to vector calculus, simple vector calculus, and do a little review of Thomson Finney as I keep reading chapter 10 and as I keep working on problems in chapter 8.